feeling. It's all right. This happened once before.
Welcome to This Happened Once Before, a podcast conversation between generational Phish fans. I'm your host, Bill, and I connect weekly with a different Phish fan to talk about their path to the band, what they like most about the scene. Then we discuss a show from the band's era between 1988 and 1996. If you'd like to be a guest or recommend a show for a future episode, contact me at happenedoncebefore@gmail.com. This Happened Once Before podcast on Facebook, or THOB podcast on Instagram. And don't forget to click the subscribe button. This will help you find the podcast easier in the future. Thanks for listening. This week on This Happened Once Before, I connect with Bobby Weaver. We talk about his untraditional path to the band, how he moving to the lower 48 has made seeing the band much easier. And then we dive into the Phish show from October 11th, 1995 at the Compton Terrace Theatre in Chandler, Arizona, on this week's episode of This Happened Once Before. Before I give my feedback on Joseph's show recommendation from last week, a quick word from our sponsor. Tarps and show supplies, Tony'sTarps.com. Are you a fan who demands more space than you paid for?
Tony's got you covered.
Did you enjoy squeezing your friends into areas where they don't belong?
Tony's got you covered.
Need a 20 by 20 foot tarp for you and a friend to treat as your private disco?
Tony's got you covered.
And just in time for festival season, Tony has released their special 40 by 40 foot festival fun pack.
Boom! Take the double space.
Use the promo code Happened Once Before when ordering, and Tony will personalize your tarp for free.
For nothing.
No longer tell people to move out. Now just point and stare until the message is received.
Scram, get out of here.
Tony'sTarps.com, bringing you the ability to pretend Phish is playing just for you.
Tony's got you covered.
Not only is Tony a friend of mine, he's a friend of ours. And thank you to Tony's Tarps for sponsoring this episode of This Happened Once Before. Remember, Tony's got you covered. On last week's episode, Joseph recommended the show from October 23rd, 2021 at the Coors Amphitheater in Chula Vista, California. A fluff head opener will always get your attention, but paired in the first set with NICU, Slave, Tube, A Slow Llama, and a rarefied Fishman original Bye Bye Foot, played only for the sixth time, this becomes a set list of must-listens. The second set continues to deliver from the jump with a 17-minute No Man and No Man's Land into an extended Free before sending everyone into the cosmos during Piper. Ending the show with an excellent Sense and Subtle Sounds. The encore gives way to a nice 1-2 punch of a mellow, lonely trip, followed by the always energetic first tube. Dare I say this was nearly a perfect night of Phish. And let me know how many NICUs did you hear. Thank you to Joseph for another great recommendation from that October run in 2021. It's been a pleasure piecing that fall tour together through this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Now let's get into the Phish show from October 11th, 1995 at the Compton Terrace Amphitheater in Chandler, Arizona, live in concert on This Happened Once Before.
Feeling. It's all right. This happened once before.
Welcome to another episode of This Happened Once Before, conversation between generational Phish fans. I'm your host, Bill, and today I'm very lucky to have with me
Bobby Weaver.
Bobby Weaver. Not the Bobby Weaver, but a Bobby Weaver. I don't want to confuse anybody out there. I don't want to misrepresent the Robert Weaver, but this is Bobby Weaver II. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, well, appreciate you having me on. Good to be here.
So we today are going to talk a little bit about Bobby Weaver's path to Phish, what got him hooked, what was their introduction, what shows they've seen, and then we're going to break down, talk about a show from the band's era from 1988 to 1996. Today, we're going to focus on October 11th, 1995, at the Compton Terrace Amphitheater, Chandler, Arizona. So we'll get to that. Looking forward to talking about that one. But first, let's talk about Bobby. So how did you find Phish, Bobby?
I got a nondescript blank tape from one of the kids on my street. My brother was in a band. I was in middle school. We had a basement where he had set his band stuff up, and because we were the last house on the street, we could play music. They could play music loud, and it wouldn't bother anybody. And so they brought all their music equipment over, including a drum set. So there was a drum set in our basement, and I decided that's what I was going to do, play drums. And I would just put this tape on. I didn't really know what it was. I don't even think that there was any lyrics on anything. I think it was literally just like an early Phish jam compilation. And I put it on and would just sit there and be enamored by the drums and try to figure it out. And then slowly just finally figured out with my brother who it was, that it was Phish. And just
how long did that take?
A good while, actually. I think if I remember correctly, we were able to figure it out by looking at old guitar magazine, like the brand Guitar magazine.
Sure.
At the time, because for me it was the drums, but for him, he heard the guitar and it's like, well, that's got to be somebody. It's got to be some large band. And this was very primitive internet time. This was very, very, very early. We're talking early 90s. So it wasn't like you could just be like, Shazam or look something up online. And so we kind of just started going through his collection of guitar magazines, and there was one that had a cover with Trey and Warren Haynes on it. And so we would just take that, and then we started listening to some Government Mule. Well, it's not that, obviously. So then who's this guy Trey? And found out that he had this band Phish, and was able to acquire some Phish tunes off of some mail-in. Back in the old days, instead of forums, we had the BBS service, or bulletin board services and messaging on the internet, and was able to find a Phish group down in Seattle, and was asking for tapes to be sent to Alaska.
I was gonna say we should tell some folks where you were and where you grew up that you were getting into Phish, because it wasn't necessarily in Vermont where they were readily available. Go ahead. Where were you located?
Cooper Landing, Alaska. It's about 100 miles south of Anchorage, about 45 miles north of Kenai, Soldotna. So if you've ever seen a picture of anybody fishing for salmon, there's a 9 out of 10 chance it was right there. It was right at the confluence of the Kenai and Russian River.
So could you make the argument that at a given time you might have been the northernmost Phish fan in the world?
Probably not.
No, somebody up in Iceland or gotcha, or that's pretty far up.
So where we were, you had Anchorage above us, which is the largest city in Alaska, which is
okay.
About 80,000 people. And then, 5 hours north of that, you have Fairbanks, which is also about, 30,000 people as well. So somebody in there.
All right, at least top 10.
It's not like there's not jam band fans. The Dead played in Anchorage in 81.
That's amazing. So, that would have been an amazing show to see.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't think I was the only one. It just, where I lived, there wasn't a lot of adolescents. There wasn't a lot of kids where we lived. My family inherited a fishing lodge and moved before I was born. And so it was a seasonal business, which the town was only really vital during the summertime. And then it just went dormant during the winter.
Wow. So So when you found this tape in the early 90s, right? The resources, like you said, were difficult to find anything. Did your brother have did the music have the same impact on your brother?
No.
Interesting, right? And he
Yeah.
was the guitarist and the musician first and brought you in.
Yeah. So we're 5 years apart. So I was born in 1980. My brother was born in 75. And I think that's really where the difference lies is I really enjoy like hair metal, 80s glam rock, but he grew up playing that, living that in that scene. And so for him, a 15-minute composition just really doesn't do it for him. You know, he's all about rock and roll. I mean, he still plays, you know, in a fast, heavy, not metal, but you know, hard rock band. And so Phish just really wasn't. He did, looking at that magazine though with Warren Haynes, he did really get he kind of strayed off because at that time Warren was playing with the Dead and the Allman Brothers, and so he kind of went down like what I call like the Atlanta,
The Southern rock.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't into Widespread Panic or anything, but he really took a liking to Warren's playing. I mean, he even went so far as to influence his first Les Paul that he bought as a cherry burst. He was really, really into the Allman Brothers and then Government Mule. So it's funny. I mean, that one tape, that one magazine kind of split us musically, but set us both on interesting paths as far as
Yeah, from a blank unwritten tape with like that, you know, it's almost like a magic box you find.
Right.
And it just leads you down these paths that you know you were both fortunate enough to be curious to follow, right? It could have been very easy, just been like, yeah, let's move on to the next band, but it was so impactful.
Right.
So you finally get your head around like, okay, there's this band Phish, and at this time it's early 90s still, you said, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So what was your introduction into like knowingly listening to them?
So, you know, I want to say it was when I had my first car. I was 16, and I had driven to Soldotna, which is a small town just south of us, maybe about 45 minutes. That's where we would go if you needed anything outside of like the small convenience store or whatnot. If you had to go to the grocery store or something like that, you would drive to Soldotna, and they had a record store. And I went in and found, let's see, I think I was looking to see if I still had the pictures of it, of when I grabbed that tape.
So still a tape at that point.
Yeah, still a tape. Because so the thing with living in Alaska with not having a lot of communications, that, and this would be something that is one very illegal, but a lot of places did this. So places would tape videos like VHS tapes. Like say you bought a tape of, I don't know, a movie from the early 90s, Pretty Woman, right? And then you had another VCR and you would make copies of it and copies of it and copies of it. And they would sell those copies at like the bodegas.
Bootlegs.
Yeah, bootlegs. And that's what this record store was doing. And, you know, I got a tape. I want to say the first tape that I got was, yeah, there it is. I found the picture. 10/25/96, Hampton was the actual first. I knew this was Phish. I knew this was what I was getting. I bought it and I listened to it until it fell apart. We all remember the days of tapes where we would start warbling and
hear the other side of the tape because you could play it through so much. Yeah, exactly. I did that to Led Zeppelin 2 and 4 as a kid. So the first introduction, it wasn't even studio. You were able to go and purchase, well, say not purchase, acquire a live recording.
Yeah, basically what it was there was a guy that saw a market that because of where we were, you could go to him and kind of like you would with the internet now, you go to him and be like, hey man, there's this band Phish that I like, and I don't know how to get any of their stuff. They don't play it on the radio. What can we do? And he would connect with whoever he did down the lower 48, whether it was getting audience tapes or getting the studio releases that finally started to come out, like with a live one. And they would make copies of them. And that was really kind of the first way that what I saw like an Alaska Phish collective start to come together, because more people start to hear about that. In the late 90s, like 97, 98, you really started to see quite a few of the bluegrassy jam bands of the time were starting to come up to Alaska, because they don't require a lot of equipment. That was the biggest reason Alaska doesn't get big concerts, is because there's not equipment already there, and people don't want to have to pay to fly all their equipment in. And so, but if you're leftover salmon and all you've got is a handful of acoustic instruments and a small set, you can plug in anybody's PA. So
yeah, they're on the plane with you.
Exactly. So we started to kind of see an increase of live music in the outskirts, not in the Anchorage area, but like, because Anchorage is a horrible, dirty city. But like where we lived in the mountains on the river was very beautiful. We started to see some of these bands starting to come to Alaska for vacation and be like, hey, we should play a show here. And so that just kind of created a little bit of a music scene snowball, where some live shows started to happen, which gave fans, of other genres a place to go and connect with other people, and finally start to meet people that own Phish too. Put a Phish shirt on, go to a show, and hope that somebody be like, ooh, I like those guys too. Cool, you have any tapes? Like,
and I would imagine, being that it was a unique experience for those bands to come up, their fan base, the diehards would maybe a handful travel up there, and that expands your network of people who you're meeting. It gets outside of Alaska and your greater area. Now it's like back into the States. So do you remember who that first show was that you saw back then? Like what?
It
was Leftover Salmon.
Yeah, I mean, those guys came up a lot. They still go up there and play a lot. I mean, when we left in 2010, the biggest thing Alaska has is called salmon stock, and it's a big fundraiser to protest the pebble mine, which they've been trying to build for a long time. That's potentially would potentially harm countless acres of protected salmon spawning area. So it's this big for Alaska Music Festival, and like Trampled by Turtles come up and play, Leftover Salmon and play, Michael Franti and Spearhead. I mean, they weren't like AA acts that were coming up there, but we started to get things pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's brand name recognition, and I think what it sounds like to me is that it expanded the horizon of what music is out there in this genre, right?
Yeah.
Because you had this really unique experience of getting just jam Phish on an unmarked tape that started your journey, right? Like it really is like a Mark Twain scavenger hunt. It's like, all right, good luck. If you want to, you're gonna have to work for this, dude. Like this isn't gonna be easy. But then all of a sudden you're like, and as a musician yourself, we were talking before we started, multi-instrumentalist and those type of things, where now there's more coming into your bandwidth, right? And expanding your horizons. And for a band like Phish, who is always constantly feels like adapting and absorbing every type of musical genre that's out there, and I can't even innumerable amount of bands that they have opened my eyes to in places I never would have thought to go look. So you're up there until 2010. And we both know they haven't gotten up there, right? We know Phish doesn't. They swim upstream, but not that up to Alaska. So,
right.
When did you get a chance, or have you had a chance to see them in concert to this point?
Yeah, so they did come to Texas. You know what? Actually, I think when we were talking before, I think I said it was 2015, but that was the year we went to MSG. It was 2015. It was 2014 was the summer that they played in Texas. So yeah, we got a really hot night outside in Austin, where I thought I was going to die from heat stroke.
Oh,
and then 2 really awesome indoor summer Phish shows in Grand Prairie the following weekend. So that was really nice. It was indoors, smaller venue. I think it was like 8,500 was the capacity in that theater. So it was really nice, really cool lights. Got to see Petrichor, which was one of my highlights for that. I know that's controversial and they haven't played it forever. A lot of people hate it, but I thought it was great.
Well, I think that's part of this whole experience, right? And I think listening to a band like them who you can't put into a specific box when it comes to what they sound like. You know, I don't know where it would run where you find a group of fans together where their favorite song overlaps, right? Like when do you get to person two? So I think that's it. Like there's sometimes, and it changes. If you're a true Phish fan, your favorite song's changing like every 2 to 3 months, probably, or more. And I think that's the beauty of all of this too. So you get to these amazing shows. That must have been really cool. Like that much time, like what a build up, right? Like I'm sorry your first experience was almost heat exhaustion. But
yeah, I mean, it was just really cool to I think there's really something to be said when you get a large group of people together for the same thing. There becomes this kind of collective consciousness that you don't see all the time, like with the way that the lot situations are, and like waiting in line to get in, and there's not a lot of people that are sitting out in the sun for 4 hours to get into a, I don't know, current music person's concert so much like there is, with the Phish fans, like, because we got there, we want to be on the floor. And so we had to sit out in the sun forever. But it was a lot of fun. We took a situation like that, made it fun, met a lot of really cool people. I think it's cool to support people that are, vending on a lot, that's how they make their living. So try to do, support that. It was just really awesome. And just this kind of a large crescendo of making such a big move from moving from Alaska to Texas. And I really hate it here, if I'm being totally honest. So that was kind of like a slice of good that came into, okay, well, I may have moved to the pits of hell in Texas, but at least I'm situated in the middle of the country. Either coast is 3 hours away. Phish doesn't play Texas a lot. It's great to see these shows, but now wherever they play, I can get to. And I've taken advantage of that, seen them, in several different locations now.
That's really cool. And I think one of the recurring themes of this podcast has been like that feeling we all get being there together. Mm-hmm. And that, isn't replicated a lot anymore in the 21st century, outside political and religious rallies, right? And unfortunately, those don't look nearly as much fun as what we're doing. So, but I think that whole ecosystem, that you refer to there, right? Because it is a whole economic system that is part of this environment as well. When folks are making their way from scene to scene, selling cool t-shirts, grilled cheeses, whatever it is, right? Like, and then people go into the shows, and then the after shows when people are, running a disco in the parking lot. Like there's just fun stuff to be had. So that feeling then of being, now you can partake and go, they may not be local, but you'll be able to be within striking distance, which is nice.
And I think what really solidified when you talk about that togetherness was I was fortunate enough to be able to hit Dick's before the groundhog plague, before they killed camping. And I took my old man 40-year-old ass in a tent and by myself, and I went to Dick's, and I had an amazing time.
It's awesome.
Not just at the shows, but even being by myself in my camping area, there was cool people to hang out with. There was always people to talk to. I'd go get something to eat, sit down at a table. Somebody would notice, oh, you by yourself? How you going? It just, I don't feel like if I went to a Kenny Chesney concert, I would have that same camaraderie with the people.
Well,
and I don't mean
said.
like, and I'm not trying to like single out Kenny Chesney. I just,
you don't have an axe to grind with Kenny Chesney.
No. I mean, he can dance around Cancun and talk about beer all I want. I don't know. I just,
Yeah.
In the same way that when I tell people I listen to Phish and they give me a blank stare, that's just kind of how I feel about. But I mean, good on them. I live in a really small blue collar town in the middle of very conservative Texas. There's one bar in our town and I can go and I can see those people get just as excited about somebody singing a song about cold beer and pickup trucks. And if that's their thing, man, I'm not gonna, talk crap on it or anything, because I would say this a lot. I'm like, well, what am I to say? I listen to Phish. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I think what I would say there, the difference would be, from my experience of going to concerts of other bands outside of, the jam band arena, is it's not necessarily a collective experience that the we feels like for a Phish show. That we all came together for this, right? Like other concerts are like everybody got their ticket and we're all here. Okay, they can go on now, right? Like I think when you get to the show and you're parking and setting your tent up, it's like we're here. Like you might have been by yourself, but your whole mindset's like, oh, we're here. Like you're not camping alone, right? So I think that kind of transcends the fandom in a way. Is that these folks who get into this band, I think, all fundamentally are open to experience, mayhem, mischief, fun, whatever you want to look at, like a Hunter S. Thompson-esque view of life, right? And I think not to the extremes, but like where you have to experience life to live life. And folks who get together and watch four amazing musicians perform high wire acts without a net in front of 8, 10, 15, 80,000 people is rewarding in every aspect of the experience. And I don't think people leaving a Kenny Chesney concert are like, all right, we got to sell these grilled cheese to get to the next Kenny Chesney concert. Good.
I think the main difference, and I've had this conversation with my wife a couple times, who, God love her, puts up with my Phish, is, she's real into Tool. She's as much into Tool as I am into Phish. And we're getting ready to go see them next week. And we're just kind of talking about the parallels between the two bands and the fans and whatnot. And I think the big difference, I think, with Phish is every night is a special experience for the people at the show. It's a different set. You can kind of, in the last 10 years, you can kind of guess what's going, coming. You might get a Mike's to open, you might get Down with Disease to open the second set, probably going to hear Tweezer in a 3-night stand. But when you go see Tool, they're going to play the same 8 songs. They're going to go to the next city, they're going to play the same 8 songs. Maybe they'll change up the encore. They've been doing cool stuff, bringing Billy Strings out. That's cool.
I saw that. That's crazy. Yeah, that's great.
But at the Phish show, we go and that's it. It's never going to happen again. They're never going to play this same show again. And I think it just leads itself to that mentality of the people there versus the mindless drone of just buying a ticket and a Bud Light and going and listening to the same songs I hear on the radio 100 times a day.
Yeah, it's like that Garcia mindset, right? Like he was done with it once the concert was over, right? The music. Yeah. Everybody, you want to record it and go listen to it a million times. I don't care. I'm done with it. I'm not going to listen to it again, right? Like that. So that just tells you something about the artist and the experience. And I think that's something I know I treasure. The risk taking, the not playing the same thing is not something this fan base would accept as far as what they do. And nor is it what they want to be, right? Yeah. That was the whole reason why they broke up. They didn't want to be a legacy act. And they've done everything possible to make sure that, that's not going to happen. They've fallen into routines, to your point, but as we get older, we all do. But we're lucky enough to see them still hit it 50 times a year almost, right? They're tearing it up. So as someone who got introduced to the live aspect of the band in the 90s, right? That bootleg was 96, you said?
Mm-hmm.
And then not get to see them until 2014, pardon me.
2014.
So we're talking almost 20 years, right? Like that's almost 20 years different. So what was that experience like? I know you knew the band had changed.
Sure.
But what was that? That must have been interesting.
Yeah. I mean, eventually we did get some regular, stable internet. Things like I can remember I went and saw Phish 3D in Anchorage at the theater. So I was
Okay.
able to see that. They put out some DVDs that we were eventually able to get and watch. But there's, I don't know, it didn't take the live show experience in person for me to continue my passion for the band, I guess is.
No, that's it, right? Like that's kind of what I was getting at, because I think it's almost like a catnip in a way, right? Where you have access to this thing you don't get to go see.
Yeah.
That's an interest. It's not a great feeling, I'm sure, to have, but I was thinking about the release of all those years when the the lights go on or lights go off and everybody's cheers, and there you are. You're like, finally.
Yeah, I mean, total goosebump
Culmination.
Situation, almost spiritual, like just finally able to see and do, what I've been so passionate about. I think Phish, because they have done what they've done for so long, and because of how I grew up not being able to see them, I think has just ingrained in me. Like, I'm just one of those people that always just listens to Phish. When I lay down at night to read, I put Phish on. When I wake up in the morning, take a shower, I put Phish on. When I get in the car to drive somewhere, I put Phish on. Like, I'm into Phish. I'm not just into listening about it. I like reading about it. And I like reading about, well, why did Trey change this guitar in the middle of the tour? Why has he got these different amp heads now? Why is Fishman playing these different cymbals? Why is Mike playing a shorter scale bass now? Like, it just, outside of just putting headphones on and listening, Phish provides me with so much more. There's just.
Do you think being a musician, sorry, because you got me peaked now. So do you think that coincides with your understanding and love of the theory of music?
No, I don't think so, because I'm really not. I'm ear trained, self-taught. I'm not really, big. I mean, I can understand music theory, but I never studied music theory. I don't think it's that. I think that it's just. I think it's the way that I grew up being inquisitive and just always seeking out. I think people in our age range that grew up with the internet just kind of, some people still have that, where I like, the information's out there. I want to know about it. I'm not just complicit with just sitting back and just listening to something. I want to know more about it. I want to dig in.
Before I was actually diagnosed with ADHD, I used to say it this way: I care a lot about the things I care about, and I don't care about at all about the things I don't care about, right? Like, it's really hard for me to care about something I don't care about. But like, if I'm into it, like when I was a kid, it was baseball, all the stats, the cards, or all the players. Okay, I'm gonna memorize all that. And I think that comes with this as well, And I think why I asked that question was because you're not the first person to bring up the equipment aspect of this, right? And for someone like myself, who's not a musician in any way, who just loves the sounds that people can make, not just these four people, but anyone who could do it, to hear you take that to the next step with that pedal, that guitar, that cymbal, shows just a more elevated ear, right? I think, in my opinion, that you're able to discern those things.
Well, and there's also a lot of places to talk about it. So,
okay.
And that's another thing for me. So again, I live in a very small, conservative, red place in Texas that, I won't get political or anything. I do apologize for that, but I don't really fit in here. My music doesn't fit in where I'm from.
I live in a blue dot in a red state too, so don't feel bad.
Yeah, and so I'll spend my evenings reading the Phish Reddit. I'll spend my evenings reading Fishnet forums, things like that. Like, I love to be able to have something with substance outside of just the music. And I think that Phish really lends itself to that, because there's a lot of really analytical people that are in the same way. like me that want to discuss things, that like to read things, and my wife makes fun of me because she'll look over and I'm reading a forum and she's like, "What is it? 1995, you're reading a forum?" I'm like, "Yeah,
it's the easiest way to consume the information that I want. What are you going to do? If it hasn't changed to be better, then that's it. And I love the way that Phish.net, Reddit, can do those conversations, right? Because that's what you're trying to have, a conversation, and the internet's not the greatest place to try to have an elevated conversation. But to your point, when you could drill into other people who have those same interests, it's what the internet was supposed to be for, is to connect like-minded people so that you're like, hey, I'm not the only one who feels this way or likes this or, any of those things. So that's really cool. That's really cool that you take it that extra step. Reminds me of my buddy Derek, who just started a podcast called The Central Part of Town. He's someone who's 24/7. Like, he just consumes it, every aspect of it. And, when I told him, I was like, no, I just kind of go to Reddit and that's usually my thing. He's like, that's it, and it's kind of surprised, but I feel like Reddit's like an aggregate of all the other stuff that I'll eventually get, so you get to see them in person for the first time. What was the first song you heard live?
And I knew you were going to ask me that, and I didn't pull the set list up. I know the Grand Prairie set list.
And it could have been the Heat Exhaustion. You don't want to sell that short.
Yeah, I was trying to pull that up. I'm not. It's funny too, because I'll tell you that I sit and I listen and I read and this and that, but I'm not a big stats guy.
Not me either.
I'm pretty like, when I mistakenly read the 1021 show, I was like, oh, a Tweet Surprise show. Like, I know a lot of the different shows and whatnot, but sometimes, like with that Austin show, I just have a hard time remembering what they played.
Well, you did 3 shows in 3 days, right? Was it? Or is it a little break in there?
Yeah, it was, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
That was Austin, you said, right? That first show?
Correct.
Yeah. So that must be a cool town to see them in.
Yeah, Austin's pretty good. Yeah, it was August 31st they played.
Oh, so right in the heat of summer. That's lovely.
No, that wouldn't have been right. That would have been during gigs.
Okay.
July 28th.
I'm up sooner.
Yeah. It was good. Open with Party Time.
Okay.
I remember that now that I was jogging my memory. Didn't used to like that song until I heard it live.
And so it sounds like you've been, how many shows have you been to total?
Let's see. 9, just 9
Okay.
shows.
Well, have you seen any other band like that? I mean, that's the question I always ask people. They're like, "Oh, just," and I'm like, "I've never seen another band 70 times. Have you?
I have actually.
Really?
I have seen the Drive-By Truckers.
Oh,
maybe 15 times. So there was a couple times where in the fall I flew down and they were playing a lot in the Southeast where my brother was, and we saw them play a couple times in Nashville, a couple times in Athens, St. Louis, and then Columbia, Missouri.
I just found them recently, man. They are so good.
Oh,
Holy mackerel. Like, I felt, it's like one of those things. I felt so late to the party. I always knew the name, but like, as I tell my wife, there's not enough time. Like, you're never going to get to all the good music. It's there. You got to remember to go to it. But that was one I just started playing around, like John Prine, you just like, oh man, you go down that rabbit hole and you're like, shoot, there's so much goddamn good music out there. Like, there's just so much. You start pulling the string and it's ridiculous. I watched a YouTube video on Weather Report the other day, watching Weather Report live from Monterey or something like that, Monterey. And next thing I know, I'm on some down rabbit hole on, freeform jazz in the late 70s. And I'm like, oh God, I got to get out of this hole. So of the 9 you've been to, what was your most favorite show?
Probably the 12:30 show of the 2015-16 New Year's Eve run in Madison Square Garden. Probably one of my favorite Rebas. We had a really good time at the show. We did the whole run, but I think that the night before New Year's Eve was really the better of the nights. That was the year they did the big hourglass in the middle for the gag. So that was really cool to see for the New Year's Eve. But I think that the night before New Year's Eve was the better show, and it was really cool to see all the lights and the way that they were able to tap into the MSG lights instead of just their rig, and that was really good.
Yeah, that it's amazing to me as someone who grew up in the Northeast. So that's where I saw them a lot there, early on in the 90s, but how they've turned that room into their residency is really it's insane. I'm curious. I wonder how long they could do it for. I think 2 weeks is probably the max right now, but to see that they're able to do that quite frequently is incredible.
Yeah, people are always like, that's the only show that we've gone to, but a lot of times we'll do the live stream couch tour and people be like, oh, what are you doing for New Year's Eve? I'm like, oh, watching the Phish show. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, where they played? Same place they played for 50 times at Madison Square Garden. They're like, Phish plays at Madison Square Garden for New Year's Eve?
It doesn't compute to people outside of our world. It's funny to them when they do know, right? Because they're like, oh, you want to see Phish again? You're like, of course. Where else would I be going? But for folks who and part of me is still amazed that like it just shows you how insulated folks are. That like this thing that is huge is still not making it into people's periphery, and they are the same ages as we are, right? This isn't like our parents' generation or younger kids. This is like people who came up the same age as the band. So it blows my mind. But if you're not on the radio and if people still listen to the radio, I don't even know if that happens. But
I don't know.
So with 9 shows, is there a song you're chasing that you want to hear live?
No, not really. I was really hoping to hear Punch You in the Eye, and I got that my second show. No, I don't think so.
Okay. It's a good way to go into the show. No expectations. Yeah,
I mean, I've crossed off pretty much some of my big favorites. Like I said, I was lucky enough to see Petrichor before they seem to have shelved it. They played Mound. They played Way at that same show, so that was kind of cool. Don't see Mound too often.
Or Way.
Yeah. That was the only show that I wasn't. So that was the second night. The first night in Grand Prairie, we were on the floor, and that was really nice. The second night, we couldn't get on the floor, and we had seats kind of far back. And it was kind of a bummer because they were just, I don't know, like everybody was just sitting there. We were the only people standing up. It's kind of weird.
Is it a lawn situation or is it seats?
It was the indoor theater.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Pardon. Yes, those 2 nights were indoors.
Yeah, but we were like we were like the second level, almost towards the back, and there was just a lot of people sitting there. It was kind of strange.
That is odd for a Phish show.
Yeah, and that second set, I mean, it was weird song placement, and they just seemed a little bit off. It wasn't the heater that the previous night was, but such is Phish.
Is there a show you find yourself listening to more than others? One that you haven't been at?
Here lately, I've been listening to a lot of Magnaball. I've been revisiting somehow just randomly the sound check played the other night while I was sitting there reading, and I forgot how good that Magnaball sound check was.
I got to check that out. I just listened to Reed had recommended the second night of Magnaball, and I just listened to that.
Oh, that's funny because my suggestion to you was going to be that afternoon set of Magnaball. So
the afternoon set, is that the opening set of day 2?
Correct.
Oh yeah, no, I want a whole concert from you. So
gotcha.
We'll get to that later. But yeah, no, that you can think about that. Put that on the back burner. One set doesn't do it for me. I need a whole show. And Reed was very generous enough to give me a 3-set show, which I appreciate.
Nice.
That was sarcasm, Reed, if you're listening. What show do you frequently recommend others to listen to?
I'm a good standby with the live one. I think that's a good entryway for folks. I think it's hard to sometimes suggest a live show too, because people just kind of get overwhelmed with stuff. If somebody is like, what's a good Phish song to listen to? Or, I try to steer them in the way, maybe like Kill Devil Falls, Sneakin' Sally, something that's not super composed, but not super jammy. That's, kind of upbeat, Cavern, Character Zero, stuff like that. When people ask for show recommendations, I try to ask some prodding questions like, what do you want to hear? Stories? Do you want to hear rare stuff? Do you want to hear what people think is their best stuff? Like, you want to hear a lot of guitar? What is it? And then from there, just kind of try to dissect and, I want to get real high and listen to some funky music. All right, well, throw some 2.0 on there and it'll get real weird.
Yeah, real fast too. So that's an interesting, like, sideways way to get people to listen to Phish. I found you threw one song in there that's a cover, and you kind of give them that sideways, like they're like the greatest cover band in America vibe. Like you throw in a couple, hey, you know the song, and then, oh yeah, who is that? That's Phish. Oh, I didn't know they sounded like that, right? Like you said Sneaky and Sally, and like that's a good one because people don't even know it's not even their song, right? Like it's like a Robert Palmer song, a Power Station, one of those. So it's that's a good way to kind of side door people in, is through covers. That's not a bad idea. What's your favorite studio album?
My Story of the Ghost.
Yeah, I remember when that came out, man. How different sounding it was from, where they left off, and the path they took in the Choose Your Own Adventure book, right? After in 1997, 96, 97, whenever that album came out. That set them on a whole new path, new sound, everything. It was really interesting to think about that. I was talking to the Joseph, the last episode I did, and he's my age and, around my age, and saw them in the 90s. And one of the things was that, like, everybody has this 1.0, 2.0 conversation now of the band. And I jokingly said to him, I'm like, back then that was 2.0. Like when that funk started, everybody's like, whoa. Like it's completely different. This is completely different than the Tension and Release and the Million Miles an Hour. And people, they do it by years, but if you do it by sound, to me, that's probably one of the tent poles of the whole thing is that year. Story of the Ghost is awesome. It sounds great on vinyl too.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, so this is gonna be a good question for you. If there's a place you could see them, where would you want to see them?
That they haven't played, or just in general?
Yeah, anywhere in the world, anywhere you want it to be. This is your concert, Bobby Weaver. You set the stage.
I'm really excited for the Sphere shows. I know that may be a cop out because there's a million other cool places, but I'm really excited to see what they can do in that environment. I think it's going to blow all of us away. I hope that I don't fall and die from the steep seats.
Well, me too. I hope you don't fall and die from the steep seats too. Yeah. It's not a cop-out answer because it's a personal answer. Like we were talking about before, individualized experiences, right? And I think something you alluded to isn't just the band, it's this multimedia experience that it's going to be. Yeah. Right. And I think you have every right to be that, because there's nothing like it on the planet.
Right.
Maybe Saudi Arabia probably has something, China, that we don't know about, but like there's nothing here in America that will have this type of concert environment.
And I feel like, it was really not necessarily built for Phish, but I mean, obviously with the partnership that they have, with the corporation and with Trey testing the audio.
I did not know that. See that breaking news. Yeah, I didn't know that.
You remember when Trey did those the Beacon jams during COVID? live streams. So they were testing out that spatial audio at the Beacon Theater before they were going to install it at the Sphere. And that's one of the
owner. The owner owns the Beacon, owns the Sphere. It makes sense, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So beyond just like the visual experience, I'm really excited about the audio of the Sphere and the capabilities it has there for it. No matter where you're sitting, you're going to get the best sound. And if you're sitting in a seat and in an area that you only speak German, you can still hear the music, but they translate the vocals into German. Like, what kind of crazy world are we living in?
One that I did not know we were living in until you just said that. Right? I had no idea about the translation and stuff.
Yeah,
I thought it was just going to be like seeing a concert in IMAX. Really, was more my. I didn't realize the almost Carnegie Hall like attention to the acoustics and things.
Yeah, they put it in a lot of money, technology, and time into the sound, not just the visual aspects of the inside and the outside. I mean, it's truly a world class. Like there is nothing like the Sphere for musicians to play in, and I'm just really excited for Phish, who I feel like is at this stage to do that and do it correctly, and not just have 5,000 books show up and tear the place up. Like I think the crowd and the band is at a mature level to go to Vegas now, and do that Sphere correctly.
With the perfect adult mindset of like, you don't need to do more than 4 days in Vegas, right? Like that's what you learn as an adult, right? Like 4 days is plenty in that dystopia.
Yes.
But I think, say what you will about James Dolan. He's not a great person, but he does love music, and he does put time and attention into. He owns Radio City Music Hall. He owns the Beacon. He owns MSG. And he owns the Sphere. So he has his own crap band, but like he does really care about the quality of experience for music.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about sports, but definitely music he cares about. What's your favorite cover song they do? Speaking of cover songs,
Day in the Life.
What a coincidence. I think we'll hear that later in the show.
Yeah.
What about that strikes you? What resonates with you?
I don't know. At first, when I was listening to tapes and stuff before there was the internet, I didn't realize there was two singers. Or three singers, or four, whatever you want to call it. I didn't know that sometimes Paige sang. Sometimes I just thought Trey sounded kind of funny, things like that. I don't know. I like the simplicity of it. I like when they close with it. I don't know. It's just a good song. I've always enjoyed that song. I think that they play it well.
It has that Phish like chaos, in the build up and everything before they switch over to vocals and all that. And in a way, right, it is very Phish like in its connected lyrics that still create a story, right? And it's that whole story of that song of them each having a part of a song and then making a song out of it and making it still sound like this cohesive story is very Phish like in it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So I ask everybody this question when it comes down to you enjoy myself: boy, man, God, or shit?
Shit.
Why is that?
I don't know, current state of life.
So it's flexible, you're saying?
Yeah, today it's shit.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope tomorrow is not.
No, I mean, on the grand scheme of things are great. Just life after COVID is a struggle, and I hope that all the listeners out there are all taken care and that everybody is doing well, because I was in the liquor industry. That's what brought us to Texas, and when all the bars and restaurants shut down, things just did not go good. So that's why I say shit today is that, but most of the time it's good.
Yeah, and I think well said about this pandemic, COVID we went through or go through, this isolation but staying connected in these ways of concerts and message boards and podcasts, and, affirms that there's something bigger than what's, 6 feet in front of you. and what
Mhm.
can sometimes be your worst enemy is, one of the main, theories, not theories, but themes of literature is, man versus himself. And sometimes that's the worst, right? When it's man versus himself. So when you get out there and you talk to other people and realize that they're struggling, or you can empathize with each other's struggles and find a connection. Like we said, that's the best of the internet is that.
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
that. So you ready to get into the show?
A quick word from our sponsor.
Tarps and show supplies, Tony'sTarps.com. Are you a fan who demands more space than you paid for?
Tony's got you covered.
Did you enjoy squeezing your friends into areas where they don't belong?
Tony's got you covered.
Need a 20 by 20 foot tarp for you and a friend to treat as your private disco?
Tony's got you covered.
And just in time for festival season, Tony has released their special 40 by 40 foot festival fun pack.
Boom! Take the double space.
Use a promo code Happened Once Before when ordering, and Tony will personalize your tarp for free.
For nothing.
No longer tell people to move out. Now just point and stare until the message is received.
Scram, get out of here.
Tony'sTarps.com, bringing you the ability to pretend Phish is playing just for you.
Tony's got you covered.
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So again, to remind you all, we are going to be talking about October 11th, 1995 from the Compton Terrace Amphitheater, Chandler, Arizona. So unlike your first show, they aren't going to kill people in the heat of July, but Arizona in October is probably gorgeous, I would imagine. The snowbirds probably start arriving around then. But this show, were you familiar with the show before we talked about it, before we started listening?
I was not in super heavy rotation. The thing that stuck out to me was that Stash opener.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I hadn't done that very often. And the Divided Sky got kind of weird. And I like it when it gets a little bit weird, especially when the compositions deviate ever so slightly from their normal lines. So was big on that Stash, was big on that Divided Sky. Even the sample and jar, I mean, it was really good. And then that second set's just classic 95. I mean, I've listened to the second set way more times than I've listened to the first set.
Agreed. And why I picked this show was I have to figure out if I have a bias towards some of these West Coast shows from this era, because not not as dire as your situation in Alaska, but being in the Northeast, it was always kind of like a treat to get a show from out West.
Mm-hmm.
And, this was one of those shows that there was soundboards of that circulated, that was in the collection, in 95, right? So you had the show for some reason, this is really 2 weeks, 3 weeks before they burned Chicago to the ground as the Who for Halloween, right? And you can kind of hear that here. So I think that's where I'm interested now when I speak to someone like yourself and we go through and, you're like, yeah, no, that second set had it from beginning to end. And there's these highlights. I want to make sure that it's not my own bias, right? Of these good quality sounding tapes that came back. So to your point, they open up with Stash. And my first note is like haymakers from the start.
Yeah.
There's just something in the crowd. You can hear it in the crowd. It's like one of those, if you could pick up audience quality, you just hear the crowd that's there is ready for a good time.
And this was in the height of radio, and this was, and I didn't know for a long time why they kept saying live in concert. This song live in concert. It's because the radio DJs were playing Phish songs on the radio from a live one, and they kept telling people the song you just heard was blank blank from Phish live in concert.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. That last song was live in concert. Thank you.
I had no idea. I thought they were just poking fun. I thought they were just having a good time. So it was actually from Arizona DJs or just nationwide?
No, from the Arizona, the Chandler, whatever radio stations were there. They were, the college radio or whatever alternative at the time that was trying to sell tickets for the show, because the show wasn't sold out. So they were trying to sell more tickets. And so they were playing cuts of them live, and then after every time they would play one, they would put that tagline, "You just heard, you know, party time from Phish live in concert." And so that's what carried through that first set of Trey keep saying that over and over.
I thought it was very fun. Like I thought it was like one of those backstage jokes that made it out to, which probably was, right? That made it out to this
Yeah.
to the front of the stage. But when he says that, because that stash is so smoking, to your point, like, and like I said, haymakers from the jump, but by ending it live in concert, like, just adds that sense of humor that they have about who they are and what they're doing. Because that, to your point about not opening with it frequently, but like opening with a 15-minute number that you don't open with frequently in a place you don't really play. I forgot to go back and look. I'm not, to your point about stat guys, like, I'm not afraid to make a mistake, so I don't care if anybody, like, you know, oh, that's not.
Well,
but like,
so that was the second time they did it. It was either 92 or 94. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that was only the second time
that they had opened with it.
Correct.
And I was thinking even how frequently they had played Arizona at this point.
Yeah.
Right. Like, because that's even probably, it's not even in the real loop as a touring thing now. You know, you talk about Texas, Arizona is definitely going to be out if Texas is out. So to hear this live in concert, right? And then the next one they come into is, you know, not your, well, atypical Phish song, but not a typical rock band song, with Old Home Place, also live in concert.
Also.
So the hilarity continues not only through these first two songs, then they get into Cavern, but then the first real, after Stash being this insane opener, but to what you hit in the opener was that Divided Sky. You know, and it's weird in different ways, from the, you know, the pause and the note is warbled, you know, played differently than the normal just hold it. You could probably speak to that better than I can.
Yeah, it you know, it stays symmetrical within the composition, but you know, there's some stuff that Trey's doing with some loops as he gets, you know, towards the last third of the song, and it really just it just teases some evil Phish in there. Like, it's right on the cusp. Like, you know, 2 years, if it was 2 years later, they probably would have, but it was definitely a really good first set, Divided Sky. I don't know off the top of my head that there's another one in 95 that really stands out. Above this one, going back and re-listening to a couple, it's just a little bit more distinct, and like you said, it just has just the hint of just something that just kind of gives you those goosebumps and makes you
listen, right? And I think, you know, where to your point, right, like, hey, versus other versions of this song from the same year, right? So like, if they played it the same every time, then why are you even bother having the conversation? Right. So to your point, now here's a standout version played differently than I've ever heard it. It's not something they ever replicated again. I think it was just the feeling of the desert, right? And I have a note here about the 14-minute mark, and I think you alluded to about the I'm going to use your Dick's analogy, but like a groundhog popping their head up, right, with evil Phish, with dark Phish, right? I think in the second set that does come up. I think that fully comes up out of the hole, right, and shows you what 2 years later is going to start looking like. But Divided Sky, for a song that is normally, you know, so composed from beginning to end, this is definitely one that throws some listening wrinkles in, I'll say, where you're like, oh, that was interesting. Oh, that's not the way they normally play it. Into a really, you know, 95, if I could, is, you know, there's not, it's just a perfunctory song for them at that point. The guitar solo on the outro is always something that I've enjoyed, and this is a good version of it. The next one up for me, though, was the next two songs, because I think this is a really interesting move in the middle of a first set in a place that, I'm gonna lean into the fact that they haven't played Arizona a lot, right? Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. To a not sold out crowd, right? So they probably haven't played Arizona. If this concert is not sold out, it's not like they've been beating the track on this place. But with Fog That Surrounds, I wrote, this is the best thing about this band. It's like watching a potter beat the shit out of clay repeatedly until that thing comes out. And I think this version is such like raw clay is what I wrote. Like that it was so cool to listen to this version of it because you're like, oh, that lyrics doesn't exist anymore. Well, that's in a different song. Well, that part's in a different song. And that to me, as someone who was a listener and a person seeing them in concert, you had no idea what it was actually the thing it would turn out to be, or the many things it turned out to be. So what were your thoughts on that one?
Well, the way that Phish and Trey went back with the lyrics, I thought was really, really interesting. And I always like acoustic stuff. I like to see some finger picking in the stuff that Trey does, and I think he really got into it towards the end of it, and I really enjoyed that aspect as well. I think the guitar playing was really well done.
Which brings it to the most interesting part of the first set, as far as like, that's interesting, is the acoustic army, right? So you said finger picking, which is a great segue, but then all four come out and finger pick.
Yeah, and I miss stuff like that from the '90s. I miss the acoustic stuff. I haven't missed Trey's tiny drum set and things like that. I think that those things, it wasn't until, I don't think anything kind of shook me up like the acoustic army or something like the Fog That Surrounds until I heard them do the Space Oddity at Wrigley in 2016. Like they had been doing some of the acapella stuff, but not as much as they back, like in these days they would do more stuff like the acapella and the acoustic stuff. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about early Phish was stuff like the Fog That Surrounds and the acoustic jam in the first set. Like if that was your first Phish show and you weren't really certain, what you were going to see, I would just love to be around people to see their reaction to that.
Because it's such a grab bag, right? Like it goes back to that band. It's all encompassing of all styles as much as it potentially could be, right? From this brutal stash opener into a distorted is not the right word, but different sounding, divided, and then being fearless to play this thing, both things, right? Because acoustic army for the other three guys has to be daunting.
Yeah.
Right. Like, Phish was not a trained guitar player.
No.
Right. So to sit down and do it.
Guitar live in concert.
Live in concert. Also, Acoustic Army was live in concert. I don't want to shortchange anybody thinking that was a studio version, because that too was live in concert. Next up, after that kind of like really soft setting, and to your point, like ambient beauty. And now that I'm looking at the set list, I wonder if that's like Sunset first set.
Yeah.
Like that transition time. It's been coming up lately on the podcast when I hit the first set. I'm like, I wonder if that was when Sunset was happening, because like you could kind of feel the emotions, and that would be a great desert sunset setting with that acoustic army. And nothing better probably with the sky lighting up than this Julius, which comes out of there. And I know I alluded to this earlier, but this, if you want a little peek of what that Quadrophenia is going to sound like in 2 weeks, go from like the 4-minute mark on of this Julius and listen to Trey play Pete Townsend, and it's a ripping Julius.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just blistering. I think. this would be almost the end of somebody's normal's concert, you know, an hour and 10 minutes in, that would be the end. But here you've got, you know, these guys just really getting warmed up, I feel, with that Julius. Trey's playing great, Phish is playing great. There's some really cool Buried Alive teas going on in there, if you listen correctly.
Ooh, I missed that. Good catch.
Yeah. Yeah, just a really I don't know, if I was right, I would have ended it at the end of that instead of going into sample, but I'm not Trey, and sometimes they pull the ripcord. And
yeah, that happens a couple times in the second set. Talk about pulling the ripcord. We'll get to that, but like they do end this first set with sample, and I think it's just, you know, part of that 95 samples, like nothing to write home about, but it's a good way to be back in 15. And to your point, the Julius would have been a nice little leave them at a high point, you know, but people love that. You know, we were talking about like rock songs before, like Straight Ahead, like, and that's a rock song, right? Like Sample in a Jar.
Yeah.
So like, even if you have new people there, we're talking about the radio, who knows what they're playing. You know, they could have been playing that on the radio in Arizona at that time.
Yeah, and so I have a theory about some of these early shows and situations like this where they try to saturate a market with college radio and sell tickets and whatnot. And then I think that, so sometimes if I see like a placement of sample at the end of the first set in a town like this, that lets all the real fans get opportunity to go to the bathroom before intermission. So we can all go during sample and get our stuff done, and then come back to our seats, and then all the non-real fans can go wait in line.
That's an astute opinion and viewpoint on this, because when they come back from set break, right, the first thing that happens on the tape is they're shit talking the chess move that the audience made.
Yes.
Right. So like, and maybe that's it. People were just you could get out to the Greenpeace table. I think that's where you used to do the chess move, if I remember correctly. It was the Greenpeace table, maybe? I don't know. That's a lot of brain cells a long time ago, but it was like the audience would go out, vote for the move, blah, blah, blah. So that sample in a jar gave everybody a chance to go make a shitty chess move, obviously, because it just shows that fun relationship with the audience. It shows something. I was talking about the big ball jam with somebody the other day. That doesn't necessarily translate on a copy of something, you know, like where you're like, oh, that must have been cool. But like back to what you said about the Acoustic Army, like time and place, like being a fan at that time, and like the giant chessboard that was there on stage and all that, you know, for that thing was like, this was a band that was like really thinking of interesting different ways to interact with their audience, right? And and nerdy, right? Like first of all, you gotta know how to play chess. You're already a nerd already if you know how to play chess, right? So as someone who knows how to play chess, I appreciated that mindset of like, hey, let's have fun. So they shit talk the chess move, and this second set, to what you alluded to earlier, it's from the word "we're back" from the second set, because this possum has a handful of highlights, the gin, and then we get into the real stuff later with the dark stuff. But let's start with the possum. What did you think about that one?
I love possum in the number one spot coming back from break. I think they need to bring that back. They don't play that in that spot very often, and I mean it's one of my favorites to see live. I like listening to that. I like listening to that when I'm out riding on the motorcycle. It's kind of fun. I don't know. It also, you know, towards the 3/4 mark in the song, it switches to a minor chord, so it starts to get that evilly chuggy, dark Phish that I really enjoy, and you don't often get that with a possum.
No, or 95 Phish, right? I think, you know, time and place again, right? Like, yeah, possum doesn't really get, it could get weird, but it doesn't necessarily get dark. And then in the opener spot, to your point, I think is well pointed out. Like, that is a great second set opener, you know, like, and it's now traditionally like late second set now, right? Is traditionally where it's located, like almost the last song on second set. but yeah, as a first set opener, it works. The two notes I had here were the 8-minute mark and the 12-minute mark, as far as when the song really, to your point, hitting these spots that are unique to this version of Possum. And unique to 95. And I think maybe as we have this conversation and you made that observation early, that's kind of unpacking this show a little bit to me about why I thought it was good at the time and why I still think it's good now with the legs is it's not a full commitment to where they're going to go, but it's enough to show you what the next, chapter might look like.
Yeah.
And this next one, good. No, good.
That's just that's what I really liked about early Phish was the spontaneity. It's still spontaneous. We still never know what we're going to get, but there's certain parameters now. Like, I think, like, I remember being at Dick's with my buddy who had seen them a bunch. He lived in Atlanta, and he had seen them a bunch in the 90s and early 2000s. And he had been chasing Alive 2001. He'd never seen it. And, he was sitting there and he was like, man, what if they open with 2001? And I was like, if they open with 2001 at Dick's night one, I'll run up on the stage naked. There's no way it's happening, right? But back in 1995, you never knew. They could open with 2001. They opened with Stash here. You know what I mean? And that's something I don't think they've completely gotten away from it. I mean, they can play complete residency at MSG, not repeat a song. Like there's thing, but with the exception of the last year, so you can count on songs being in certain parts of the sets. It's not like it was back in the early 90s like this.
The difference being, I would say, as someone who has been part of both live experiences, is that now you don't know what song's going to turn into the 30-minute banger. You don't like back then. You could be like, "Oh, Tweezer, okay, buckle up. I know where. Let's go. We're gonna buckle in for this one." Now it's like, oh, that contact went 35 minutes. How did that happen? So I think that's where the surprise comes maybe more now, is what all of a sudden is going to be blown out and taken to different levels versus knowing the jam vehicle is a type 1 jam vehicle, type 2 jam vehicle. Okay, if we hear this, we're going to that tension and release. If we get this, we're going to go out into space. And now it's you could have both of those in the same jam in a song you were never expecting it to show up. And I think that's what keeps me coming back, to be honest with you, because if it was knowing now that it was going to be Tweezer every time, that they were gonna, and they do still do that, but like I love to not know what it's gonna be too, right? That's part of this fun.
Yeah, nobody was looking for a 30-minute Ruby Waves, before they played that at Alpine.
I am now.
Yeah.
And it's become such Wave of Hope, like another one that just becomes these because of the sound, the tonal sound of it, like leads to these places that allow them in their current iteration to like really maximize the sound on where maybe they couldn't do so much here in 95, but not in this show, because here is where we start unpacking that darkness that you talked about earlier that popped up early in the first set, but it is prevalent throughout the second set. Possum shows it at the 8 and 12, and then a song that has become a big vehicle, Bathtub Gin.
Yeah.
Here flexes its muscles as well.
I've seen that more than anything. If we're looking at stats, I've seen
that's your number one song?
My number one seen song is Gin. Yeah.
Oh, it's better than Bouncing Around the Room.
Correct.
This is good. That's a good number one now. What did you think of this one?
It's great. I think I love Trey and his looper, Trey and the boomerang, the looper that he was using back then. Really sets the stage for just a very layered sound of the Gin. I'm a big fan of Pages. I love the keys on that. The last 3.5 minutes are really, really out there for 95 Phish. It's
Let me see how long that one is, because I think you hit my notes exactly on there as far as time goes, because it really does. Yeah, so 12 minutes. So I said right around the 7-minute mark, it starts changing.
yeah,
And then that's to
and
your
you can
point.
feel it.
Right, right. So that's the beauty of those jams, right? And to your point, you had said something like not very 95-esque, because that was what you had said.
Correct.
In what way?
I don't know. I guess again, and just moving into those minor pentatonics, you just didn't hear a lot, especially in this song, for me at least, in my interpretation of it. It just it goes a little crazy, but then it just kind of chills out, and it's it's a very interesting outro in the way that they wrap that up from where they were at the 10-minute mark.
It only right. Everybody uses the ripcord analogy now too, right? And I think that's probably the last time this show that you have to worry about a transition.
Mm-hmm.
Because after that they are seamless and scary on some of these, but this gin, to your point, with a couple minutes left over, starts to unwind, which then leads to like one of those like very accurate, precise driven songs in Mound.
Yeah. Well, that's why that would be a hard song to come into, even not playing anything. I mean, that's a difficult song to play, and so to come from such an ambient place into that is testament to the musicianship of those gents.
Yeah, Mound sounds like you picked it up mid song, right? Like the way it starts, and you're like, "What? I missed something here?" And you're like, "No, we got it. We're here," you know. And this version, and this has been difficult to deal with, and I guess in a good way, obviously, when I've been looking back at this era, is like they played a lot of great versions of songs. Like that's just how they were wired then, right? Like they were just wired for perfection, and making mistakes was probably what they beat them each other up over most backstage after a show, right? And when you hear a piece like Mound performed seamlessly, after the first half hour of jamming that the second set started with, it's such a nice transition for the listener, right? Where you go from the structured piece and then all of a sudden into the opening of Mike's song, which you're like, oh, okay, cool, we're gonna relax now. And it's anything but relaxing on a Mike song.
Yeah. Kind of a long one too for Mike's.
A long one. It goes to places that a lot of Mikes definitely at this era didn't go to.
For sure.
The segue, I'm not sure how many times that segue has been done, leading into Weekapaw and going out of Weekapaw. So before the Mike song, so let's start there. It's crazy, dark, spacey were some of the words I wrote.
Yeah, I just had the word space underlined in capital letters.
Well, we're in the same vicinity then. Good.
Yeah, I mean it really kind of got out there, but not in an uncontrolled way.
Well said.
There's sometimes I think early 96 where some of the jams would kind of meander and wander, but I felt like this Mike's was pretty specific what they were going after, and you have not just Trey, but now Mike's doing a lot of crazy looping, and so there's just a lot of I don't know, refer to like atmospheric Larry noises going on that they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I said that right around the 8-minute mark, there's a push, like a dark push that you could kind of feel, and that comes out. And it's funny you talk about that with the looping and like how open and spacey it is. But what's interesting is the song they choose to segue into is like anything but those things, right? Like, and I had to go back and just listen to the transition like 5 times because I was like, how do they wind up there? So like, they wind up in McGrupp out of that space time continuum, whatever you want to call it, right? And Mike's, but it's a really awesome version of McGrupp.
Page and the Baby Grand, you can't go wrong.
Well said. Yeah,
Yeah,
that should, maybe that's their new logo. Maybe somebody needs to make a T-shirt that says that.
I saw a T-shirt that said, "When Page sits down, I stand up." I liked that one.
I got to see him in a parking lot in Pittsburgh at Jim Pollock's studio. People were getting prints there and having a conversation with somebody, and they said, when do you think the last time Page played a bad note? And it's like, wow, that's a really good question. Like, he's just so on point all the time, and I think has that bag of tricks at his disposal now that like makes him even more the mad professor I always imagined him to be when I saw them originally in '93.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, his setup at this show compared to what he has now, I mean, it's evolved into like a crazy big setup.
Oh, I can't even imagine the because he was the one who brought the sampling in too, right? Like, was he the one who introduced it to the band? So like that aspect of it and the fact that he loves playing with that stuff. But the grand piano is like one of my most favorite memories is my first show. They closed the first set with Squirmy Coil and just watching that dude to slam the shit at the keys on that piano. And I'm like, this is the greatest rock band I've ever seen in my life. Like, what the hell am I watching? But your point with him and McGrupp, he's that piano sound, right? But the whole song is just everybody like my question to you is that something as a musician, like, do you hear that coming? Like McGrupp, like, do you
Absolutely
hear that?
Not. No.
Okay. All right. So it wasn't just me. All right.
Yeah. I mean, no, definitely. I mean, definitely not coming out of gin either. It's like not even typically, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically that's the first set song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Sun Out. It's usually a Sun Out song,
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it was interesting.
And I don't know, again, I'm not going to double check this. I don't check this stuff, but I can't imagine. I would imagine it's less than a handful of times they've gone from Mike's song into McGrupp. I don't know. We'll find that out. Somebody will tell me. And then into Weekapaw, right? And I think Weekapaw is a really, I don't want to say standard 95 version, but it's not, it's an excellent 95 version.
Yeah.
But where its value lies is again in the segue that comes out of it, in my opinion, is another one that I don't know how many times a Weekapaw Llama has been segued.
I don't think it ever had before that because they weren't even playing them that much 94, 95.
And I my only note there is out of nowhere.
Yeah,
is what I wrote. I was like, out of nowhere comes Llama. Like, how no one could have predicted that except for the 4 guys on the stage. But
great seg, just interesting.
It's just interesting, like in not one and interesting on paper and interesting to the ear on both of those segues. I think the McGrupp segue from Mike's is really interesting because it's not one they built up that you hear coming. And you're like, oh, they teased it. Oh, here it comes. And there it is. It's like, it's in your lap. And then the Llama is in your face. Like that just, you're like, oh, cool, Weekapaw. That's a nice, let's take a bang. And all of a sudden Llama starts. And that energy keeps up through, Susie's a song I've seen too many times to have like a good, positive, rosy opinion about. Like, I've just seen it like so many times that's like, it's great. It's fun. It's fine. But like, if I see it now, I'm heading to the bathroom, right, to your analogy before. But this is a good 95. They're the screaming and the yelling that I fell in love with in that era, the 94 or 5 year when Phish was just
Phish yelling.
Yeah. Like that's some of the fun, best part of that band to me, right? Is him commenting in a humorous way, and then when he gives like a yeah shout in the middle of a jam. When you hear that on tape, you're like, oh, they are locked in when Fishman's yelling out like that.
I much more prefer that than the samples that he was doing.
He seemed to got
before last.
away from it.
Yeah,
You
I didn't see
know,
it last year, but whatever a year, I don't know. The last 4 years have been a blur. I don't know when it was, but whenever the hell he was doing those samples, that was kind of driving me nuts. So I'm glad he got away from those.
it was samples are interesting to me because when I read about it, and part of my story is I kind of stopped listening to them and around 2011 and got back into them around 2019. So when I read about, to your point, like reading about them, I'm like, are you kidding me? They're sampling music now. Like, that's not what I want to hear. Right. And then I listened to like Martian Monster and I'm like, ha ha ha. I see what your sampling is. I can get into that. Yeah, it got a little playing with the new toy. Yeah, right. And then this is the only one, and I guess you could call it a segue, but it was forced, right? And I think he couldn't not want to play it more. This happened a couple times in 95. I know I was at a show, the Albany show in 95 in December. There's a little bit of we're going to play this. And Crossroads comes out of Susie when the band was still playing Susie, it sounded like to me.
Yeah.
But, you know, I remember hearing that Albany version, and I remember, excuse me, this version being a standout on the bootlegs back then, and really, you know, hearing that synergy between their sounds, Clapton and Trey. I'm saying now, wasn't something I connected to before, and now, are you familiar with the Layla thing that he did with Trucks? Yeah, so like now I can't get out of my goddamn head. Right? Like when you hear that, you're like, oh, wow, you are either the greatest mimic in the world or like share that soul, right? That's able to make that happen. But Crossroads is fun. Like in the 95 Jedi Trey, let's burn it down. You know, he brought them all along with us, and it kind of seems that they're like, okay, that's it. Now we're gonna put them down and go do an acapella song. Right after Crossroads.
That's what I loved. I mean, you know, just guns blazing, and then set them down and bring us one little microphone, and we'll all just do this acapella.
And then Hello My Baby, which, you know, was part of the Simpsons acapella, you know, they did that song too. So I think that was a little bit of a homage to the Simpsons as well. But to hear them come out and do that, like you mentioned it before with Space Oddity, and you know, Freebird was the one back in the day, you know, everybody, they got a Freebird. But the uniqueness of that, right? And the willingness of the people, back to the conversation we started at the top about what fun game are we going to play today?
Yeah.
Right. What we don't know. We know the kind of the rules of the game, but anything can happen in between then. And I think that as long as you're open to going to see them burn down an Eric Clapton cover, or not the Clapton cover and somebody else, but then go into an acapella Hello My Baby, right? It's surreal in a lot of ways. And then I just noticed this for the first time, but it's sandwiched. It's the classic rock sandwich there, because Day in the Life is next.
Yeah.
So if you were somebody who didn't know the band but stayed for Crossroads and then heard that and they were like, oh, I know this song now. But we were talking about the song earlier. You know, you had mentioned it as your favorite cover they do. This was one of a handful that made its way out of Halloween '94 into. At this point, I would say heavy rotation. Day in the Life was a favorite of the crowd and them at this point, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. But this to me is, I'll repeat myself for what I said earlier, is like the quintessential Beatles Phish song. It's the best of both of their worlds, of the humor, the ability to put music together that doesn't sound anything alike, but in the end sounds beautiful. What'd you think of this?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I mean, they typically play this straightforward. There's not, you know, always a lot of jamming going on. I just, to what you were saying as well, like I think this is a great cover for Phish to play, because you've got really good piano, you've got really good bass playing, you've got really good drums, you've got nonsensical lyrics, you've got you know, the parts where the crowd can sing, and then you have this huge build up, and then
chaotic
drop, and then it just drops down into this, driving beat that's great to dance to, and people love it. And I mean, and that's the essence of Phish is that. That the song is starting and it's building and it's coming into this, and then we're building it up real big, and now we're gonna rock it out. And I just, that's what I love. I love the last part of that song. I love the way the piano works with the vocals and the drums and the accessories and the just little things like that. It's just great. I love it.
And it was one of those, like we talked about, coming out of that Halloween '94 show that stuck, right? And it obviously resonated with them as well, because that was a heavy album to cover. There's a lot of songs they could have brought with them out of that, and brought out of into regular rotation. But it just, to your point, the chaotic sounds towards the end. I mean, in between the vocal, in between the verses, it's just the Beatles couldn't have wrote a better cover for Phish to do.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%.
And then, I don't know anybody who's ever going to complain about a Chalk Dust encore. That's going to send them home shaking their bones. But like, if, I don't know how else you leave it all out on the table, right? Like, I don't know, you didn't play Tweezer, so you can't do Tweezer Reprise, but like, what do you leave out on the table at that point for an undersold crowd, trying to build up this fan base on the West Coast? I mean, that second set is just all there for the taking.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there wasn't anything like necessarily stand out about the Chalk Dust. It was pretty straightforward, but I mean, a Chalk Dust from '95 will get any normal Phish fan up and dancing.
I would hope so. I would hope so. Like that's it's fired up and it's lit, ready to go.
Yeah. Have you ever seen? There's this YouTube short. It's like a 15-minute documentary on the IT Festival, and there's this scene, and it starts with Chalk Dust, and they open the gate, and there's just hundreds of people running, and that's all I always think of when I hear that song. And so it's like this montage in my head of awesome Phish stuff, and I don't know, it's a great ender. I like it in that spot.
In an encore spot, yeah, you don't see it. I don't think I've ever seen it in the encore. I'd have to go back and look, but it would be one to make me sell some more grilled cheeses and want to get to the next city. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. A great way to, the icing on a cake of a second set, not to take away from the first.
No, that had its own highlights. Yeah. And I think, and to your point, right, because it's such a heavy second set, right? Like almost like a weighted ball that you can forget about some of the things that were a precursor to this in the first set. The Divided, the Fog That Surrounds, the going so soft as to play acoustic Army before you go so ferocious as Llama later on. I think there's a lot to love about the dichotomy of both. So would you recommend this show to someone who is looking to get into some shows from, say, '95 that weren't official releases or kind of off the beaten path?
Yeah, definitely. If they're in that 1.0 looking for, standout shows, I think, some of the standards that as a Phish fan we kind of build our house of cards with, and having a standout Divided Sky is one of those. And then that Stash, I think, is a good one for people to listen to. I actually, between Stash and Maze, I sent to my brother to try to explain to him a little bit more of the Phish tension and release style of music, because he couldn't really kind of understand what I meant, because it's, to him, not the typical style of tension and release. So I think those are really good.
Yeah, I think to his style, right? It's like once and then they're done with it, like versus like just hitting the raw nerve 50 times while you're doing it, to the audience. Yeah,
exactly. And that second set is just really good from front to back. So would definitely recommend that as a good listen. There's some good audio soundboards out there. There's a Matrix I was able to find. So
Cool. I'm glad that you enjoyed the show and you think other people would benefit from it too. So now what I normally ask is when folks come on, they recommend a show to me, post 2011. And I know you had, I was going to do Manga Ball. But is there another show you could think of in the short amount of time since then that you could think of that would be a good listen?
Yeah, I'm just gonna pull it up here just to double check myself. No, the 12/30/2015 MSG run.
You were there, right? Were you live in the person?
I was, yeah. My wife and
Cool.
I and my buddy Lincoln and his wife from Atlanta, they came. We actually spent 2 weeks in New York City for
Very
Christmas
cool.
and New Year's. Yeah, it was amazing. And our buddies came up for the shows, and so we did the MSG run. It was really great.
What was your favorite non-Phish experience in New York?
Honestly, I really had a lot of fun going to Canal Street and Little Italy. I bought some, I bought a fake Rolex.
Sure.
And, you know, just stupid crap.
Hopefully you got a good slice of pizza while you're down there.
We ate some really good pizza. And ironically, we stayed at the New Yorker, which is just a block and a half from MSG. And we found this really, really, really good pizza slice place just right up the stairs from Penn Station. I ate there a whole lot.
That's great. That's awesome. So I look forward to listening to this. 12/30/15.
Yeah.
So Madison Square Garden, place that holds dear to my heart. So thank you. Looking forward to that recommendation. Bobby Weaver, thank you so much. It was a really cool conversation. I appreciate your time. But I really appreciate your insight. You know, you brought a real unique view to this from growing up all the way up in Alaska and having that long payoff to finally see this band live. I'm glad that you're in a position now to be able to catch them in different places.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on. It was good to learn.
Thoughts remain my only breath that I have breathed since I was 10. I hope this happens once again.
If you'd like to be a guest or recommend a show for a future episode, contact me at happenedoncebefore@gmail.com. This Happened Once Before podcast on Facebook or THOB podcast on Instagram. And don't forget to click the subscribe button. This will help you find the podcast easier in the future. Thanks for listening. And I have a question for the audience. What Halloween show from 1994 to 1996 would you like to hear us discuss on the podcast? Is it the Beatles' White Album, the Who's Quadrophenia, or the Talking Heads' Remain in Light? Shoot me an email at happenedoncebefore@gmail and let me know what you think.
Thoughts remain my only breath that I have breathed since I was 10. I hope this happens once again.